the other audio is going out. And we'll be switching you guys in America. 20 seconds.
Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
5, 4.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, June 26th. I'm Dr. Mary Byrne here for Changing Times, and my guest today is Angela Romine. She is the leader of the Ministry of Civic Engagement at Calvary Chapel Church in Springfield, Missouri. So we're going to have a great discussion about discipleship and the inclusion of civic engagement and cultural change as a ministry of Christians, regardless of your denomination. So, but first, before we get started, I want to thank the generosity of Brad Pistow of Trinity Insurance and Financial Services, as well as Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia. I had a discussion with Lynn Morris this morning, and I told him our sponsors miss him because I don't do justice to the generosity of our sponsors. He said he'll be back as soon as possible, and he is planning to schedule our sponsors for an appearance here on the show so they can tell you more about what they do to serve the community and offer great deals on their services. As you know, Brad Pistow, Trinity Insurance and Financial Services, offers advice and services for investment, particularly on retirement services. Their number is 417-581-9222. And for Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia, their number, if you're looking for a car, is 417-882-3838. So we look forward to having them as guests on this show, hopefully within the month of July. An update on Lynn. I spoke to him this morning, and he's going to be released from Mercy Rehab on Friday, so 2 days to go. And he is itching to get back with us. He will join us again as soon as possible, even if it has to be by Zoom for a little while. I think I explained that he had to have a foot amputation due to the bite of brown recluse spider. And I'm hoping that when he comes back, he tells you about the change makers that he's been meeting and receiving the services of in his rehabilitation, because he's got nothing but praise for the people who have helped him through this journey. But back to Angela. Angela, I met when she was running for state senate. I mean, I live in the county, so city council wasn't a big deal for me. It is to some extent, because what happens in the county doesn't stay, or it happens in the city doesn't stay in the city. But I want to tell you a little bit more about Angela. She is a massage therapist and owner of Halo Massage and Wellness. She felt God led her to run for City Council Zone 4 in October of 2020. She won that election in April of 2021. Just in time for the whole COVID brouhaha, right? So she pushed back on the city council and the health department to mask and to encourage vaccinations. You knew something that most people didn't at the time, right? And because of that, people started asking her to pray and to run for the state senate. After 6 months of prayer, so it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction or ambition for that office. She was obedient to what God was calling her to do. She ran against the incumbent, who votes mostly with the other party. I'm not going to mention parties. In my world, God doesn't take sides. He wants his biblical world. She lost that race, but that didn't stop you. You became civically engaged, and and we'll talk a little bit about how that interfaces with your leadership in biblical citizen ministry. So you're currently president of a county women's group and secretary of another conservative county political action group. Again, I don't want to name names because it does show party affiliation. But the point is, you have to become engaged in groups that are going to support God's mission and will for his people. And like I said, in my world, neither party is totally obedient to that calling. So we have to pick and choose, but we do have to be engaged. Yeah. So tell us a little bit how you became engaged. You are a minister of civic engagement at Calvary Chapel, and I wanted to bring this up to you. If you haven't seen Jesus Revolution, this is a movie documentary, really, actually, no, it's a narrative movie, but it illustrates how Calvary Chapel was in California, was the origin of the Jesus Revolution that reignited the movement of a whole generation to come back to God. And I was teasing Angela earlier that if we're having another of these movements now, it's because Angela is igniting this revolution. So tell us how you got engaged with this at your church.
So when I was running for city council, my pastor watched a video, and he actually showed it to the church it was Charlie Kirk and Jack Hibbs from Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills in California. And Charlie Kirk made a comment in that video saying that in California, with all the strict...
Which is where this movie took place.
Where all the strict craziness was happening regarding COVID, this church was able to open up and stay open and not be harassed, not be closed, not be fined.
They challenged the government.
They challenged the government. And he said, and you were left alone. And the reason you were able to do that is because this church has been civically engaged for decades. And so he commended Pastor Jack Hibbs for having his church be so politically active. And so he said the city council knows you, the state senators know you, the House representatives know you, and they said if you get harassed, let us know, we'll take care of it. So after watching that video at the church, my pastor came up to me and said, how do we do that? And I was like,
why did he pick you?
Because I was running.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And so he's like, how do we do that? And I was like, I have no idea. I said, at the time I was like, I would call Pastor Jack Hibbs and ask him, but he's a very busy person and I don't know if he'll have time, but that's really my answer at the time. And then I got busy with the race that I was running, and then being on city council, and then running for the other race. And so, but once I lost, I started listening to a lot of podcasts, and one of the ones that really caught my attention.
You mean you lost the Senate race?
Yes.
Yeah. Because
yes.
you stepped down from city council
Correct,
to do that.
Which is one of the reasons why I prayed. I knew that was something I was going to have to do for something that wasn't necessarily, just because God calls you to run for something doesn't mean you're going to win. So I'm like, what are people going to think? And every time I thought about that, I was like, that's a fleshy thing. I shouldn't care what people think. I need to just do what God is calling me to do. So, but I really struggled. It took 6 months for me to finally come to grips with being obedient to what he called me. And I really also learned another lesson during that time frame, which is there's a difference between being obedient and joyfully obedient. Because I can't say I was joyful about the obedience.
I hear you. God's been working on me, and there's a difference between resignation, saying you're sovereign, I may as well just surrender.
Yeah.
And saying, I know you love me. And I have faith in that love, and I'll wait on you. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, so that's a daily lesson.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
So anyway, I started, and I had heard podcasts throughout, for a while now, but I started really listening to Dave Barton and Rick Green's The Wall Builders podcast. And I remember seeing a snippet of one of their biblical citizenship classes, and I was like, oh my gosh, why don't we start there? Why don't we do a biblical citizenship class? So in the loss of the race, on the path that God had me, I ended up getting to somewhere where he needed me to be. And so I went to my pastor and I said, okay, I think I have a plan. And this is what we'll do. We'll do the biblical citizenship class as a foundation so we understand and start getting to know the Constitution. Because that's the other thing. I realized, like, I said I was a constitutional person, but all I really knew was like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and
The Bill of Rights.
the
Yeah.
Second Amendment, and that's it. The three things, right?
Uh-huh.
And we don't really know what the whole document is about.
Right.
So I said this would be our foundation because it'll also give us history about our country, which is we are a Christian nation. We were built on Christian principles. So I thought this would be a great way to springboard a ministry to get people in the area that are interested, that are Christian, into civic engagement.
Right. That's something public school and the progressives have tried to detach from our teaching of our history. And these newer textbooks written by progressives and even international publishing companies who don't care for the American history, they neglect the flow of concepts between the Mayflower Compact, which was certainly established for self-governance, right? There's no
Correct.
charter in the land that they're in. They have to, the people on the Mayflower have to come together, believers and non-believers, to agree that they're going to mutually support each other to survive.
You're right.
That Mayflower Compact and the acknowledgement that God was in control of their destiny, because don't forget, they were blown off course. Somehow God landed them there.
Yes.
And their salvation is a lone Indian who was kidnapped, taken to Spain, learned English, and returned to our continent. And he's the one who taught them how to hunt and fish and survive in the land. How does that happen?
God.
Yeah.
Well, and even the communal experiment that they had, right?
Yes.
That is socialism right there at its core. And to realize that back then they tried it,
Yes.
and it did not work.
And
it's
written on Plymouth Plantation. You want this history? Go to the book on Plymouth Plantation, written by William Bradford, the governor of Plymouth Colony, and you'll have it right there. He says, Plato was wrong, because this whole socialism experiment was rooted in Plato. And the other colonies, like in Virginia, were given a charter for this socialist arrangement to enrich England.
Yep.
Right? But when you're no longer under the boundaries of the king, and that's what this Mayflower Compact was about. They said we're still loyal subjects, but we have to self-govern here because we don't have the charter. And that's what began the American mind. Thomas Jefferson called it the American mind.
Yep.
That's where the Declaration of Independence flows from, and that's where the Constitution flows from. So this whole, I always bash the 1619 Project.
Yes.
Because what it's really trying to do is eliminate the Mayflower Compact.
correct. Because there was so many positive things, and we have the America that we have now because of that.
Yes.
That's really where it
Yes.
started. So
Yes, and so we have to, this biblical citizenship, and by the way, we had a previous guest, Chaplain Scott McChrystal, who also taught biblical citizenship. There's a manual for it. You can get it online. And the DVDs. Anybody who wants to teach this in their church can do that. So he brought the manual, and that's one of the things we're hoping to have at the Cultural Impact Conference, for church leaders to just walk away with this book
yeah.
and have everything they need to
Yes.
begin this civic engagement.
Yes.
So how was it received in your church when you started it?
Great. So even the community. So my first class, I had almost 200 people sign up, and about 150 average attending my class.
Amazing. So what's the age range of the people who...
That I didn't really ask, so it's hard to say. But I mean, there were, I would say, probably between 30 and 40 and 60 or so, maybe in there. So
Yeah. I think a lot of churches, when I look out on their congregations where I visit, I don't see a lot of 30s.
Yes, we did have a few. Now, I will say, since we've continued this engagement, right? So after the class, I said, this is our foundation, and I really want to meet weekly so that we can continue, because especially if we're going to be doing classes, if we do once a month, it's going to take us forever to get through, and we're not going to remember what we're learning. But in between the videos that we show for classes, we also have conversations. So like one time I showed them how to look up MEC reports and why that's important. I showed them how to look up legislation. I showed them where to look to make those witness statements for legislation when they see something they're for or against. We've talked about Social Security and welfare and some economic things. So it's been, as topics come up, we talked about central committees. We did talk about parties. We read the Democrat platform for Missouri, and we picked it apart to see what was constitutional, what was biblical. We didn't get a chance to do the Republican Party one yet, but that is in our future. But that's kind of what. So anyway, the classes have dwindled to a core of people, and those are more between the ages of probably late 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Yeah, I'm the drum I beat is that's what public schools were supposed to be for.
Yep.
They were supposed to provide general intelligence and knowledge to the formation of a free citizenry that knew how to govern themselves and interact with government. So they had to govern themselves. The reason you can govern yourself is because you know that there's a higher authority than you, which is God. And our society, and John Adams said this, our Constitution only works with the virtuous people.
Yes.
And that virtuous people was always assumed to be the people who would follow the principles of the Bible. Whether or not you were a believer, those principles and values work. And
Correct.
that was the structure.
Right. Which is why public schools, they were created, their curriculum was all biblically based. Like they had to memorize scripture. They didn't say, are you a believer or not? They said, this is how you're going to learn, and this is what you're going to learn. Yeah. And we are just far from that now. It's just crazy.
They're using that as literature and as the teaching of reading. It's the old Deluder laws in Massachusetts. If you think I'm kidding, go back and look at the old Deluder laws in Massachusetts, because the emphasis on literacy by the Puritans in Massachusetts and the separatists, they valued literature so that you could read the Bible for yourself. You did not depend on an expert class, such as priests or pastors. You were to be literate in the scriptures so that you knew what God expected of you and your character, so that you could self-govern. And in Exodus 18-23, then, God sets up a government of people who are knowledgeable about the law. And so that was the government he gave them as they exited Egypt and he established their country of Israel. Our Constitution was written by an audience of men who knew that, and the structure of the Constitution was set up according to those biblical principles. So Charles Beard was one of the progressive historians who tried to rewrite and reframe that whole history of our Constitution. And he wrote the book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, and that's what began the shift away from the reality of our founding into this new interpretation that made everything about money and economics. So that's how we got to where we are today. That said, 100 years in human history is not a very long time.
No.
And we can undo that.
Yes.
But guess who has to do it? It's going to be the churches.
Yes.
Right? And they're going to have to reclaim their mission to if God says, my people die for lack of knowledge, we're going to have to replenish that knowledge.
Correct.
Right? And give it to them. So I applaud you in what you're doing.
Thank you.
And there was a pastors and leaders conference on civic engagement that was made available by the Calvary Chapel Dayton Valley. That just happened, June 15th.
Yes.
And I gave you the link, and you said you had watched it. What were some of the, you might say, salient points that struck you?
Well, I started watching it. I've only gotten maybe not even an hour, under an hour in. It's a 3-hour video, but it was really amazing because he talks, the first speaker, which is the pastor of the church, he was talking about how to make a biblical cultural impact and how we're called to do that. Like, yes, the role of, the main idea would be to bring salvation to people, but there's other things that come with that. And so one was, he was saying that Jesus said, teach him in the ways that I taught you. And it's not just about salvation. He gave us so many different categories of how to live our lives, how we should live our lives as Christians, and how they impacted culture. Even Jesus impacted culture. So I thought that was really interesting. So now I'm thinking, like, how do I, because that's one of the things that I wanted to be careful of with the civic ministry is not just to have another meeting where we sit and do nothing. We need to be doing something, right? And so how do we start kind of implementing a little bit of that discipleship into affecting culture in this area? And so that's going to be, I'm kind of interested to see how God's going to
I loved what he said, is
fruition.
that it's not just about what Jesus did for you, which is where a lot of churches stop their messages. It's about what Jesus requires of you.
Yes.
And talk about cultural impact. I'm in another Bible study about Jesus and women. And he didn't have to go off and approach the palace and say, you know, you're treating women like dogs here. He set examples
Yes.
of how to interact with other people and raise them up. In particular, our last story was about the woman at the well, and he didn't have to bash men. He just had to elevate women. But Marxist feminism bashes men because the only thing they know how to do is to set up a dichotomy and make them fight. And you're not in God's view of Christian behavior when you're set up for discord. That's not it.
Correct.
You have to have an impact on culture by setting an example. But first, you have to know Jesus' example so you can amplify that.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So I'm excited about all kinds of Bible studies that make us agents of cultural impact.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
and engaging with your government is one of them.
Correct. But I like that premise of that Bible study, because that's the other thing. Like, we need to learn that God created us different, and we all have our roles to play, and he created those roles. And so, that's one thing that drives me crazy sometimes when I talk to people, especially women. They have a really hard time submitting to their husbands. And I'm like, that Bible verse, there's one right after that says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. They're supposed to be willing to die for you. Mm-hmm. So as a whole, that's a whole balance, right? It's not being a doormat. It's not that you can't do things or be independent or even a strong woman, but you need to counsel, because I know me, for example, we're emotional people. And so sometimes out of emotions, we can do the wrong thing. And so and men are more level-headed. And those are generalizations for sure. But
I have to say, in my marriage, it was the opposite. Yeah. But read Proverbs 31, the last proverb, because it describes a very strong businesswoman who runs her own household, and everybody in the household benefits, and her children and her husband celebrate her. It has nothing to do with being a doormat.
Yeah.
And when you read the dialogue between Paul and Lydia, she prevails. I mean, she does not give up her intelligence or, her.
We don't have to lose our identity.
We don't lose our identity.
But we're balanced. We're co-helpers is what he built us for.
Yeah, absolutely. Teamwork.
Yes.
And, but if you don't know the scriptures, you don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
I'm just going to put it out there. Okay. So you served in the U.S. military.
Yes.
And that was another form of basically engagement, although it wasn't civic. You became a defender of the country. Tell us about that.
So I took my oath to serve very seriously. Part of the oath was that you would defend the Constitution from foreign and domestic. And
it's an oath that never expires.
Expires, exactly.
Yes.
So I think that's part of the reason also when COVID happened and I was sitting at home being obedient, like 2 weeks into the shutdown, I kind of screamed in the living room, and my husband came running out and goes, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I just realized I gave up my freedom and I didn't even put up a fight. Like, I just gave it up." And I was just an obedient little soldier, walked my way home, sat here, and I'm sitting here doing nothing. And so
he was military too.
He was, yeah, he served 8 years. He actually got to really serve our country. He was in Afghanistan and Iraq several times. I didn't get so much experience. So I got injured in basic. So I went through basic, finished basic, but basic took me 6 extra months to finish. And then I went to my next training, which was language school.
Okay.
But it's really difficult to learn a language when you're in pain meds.
Mm-hmm.
So I served 3 years, and that's all I did, basic training and language school. And eventually they decided that I was no longer fit for duty, so I got medically discharged. Okay. But I got to support my husband in the role. And I am also an Army brat. My dad served in the military also. So the love of country has always been huge in our family. I mean, most of my family comes from Mexico, and even my dad would tell, we were young, like, I can't even remember, but it was just me and my sister, and we're 10 years apart from our other siblings, so we were young, and so he would sit down and tell us, he's like, some people are going to look at you and think less of you because you're Mexican and you're a woman. He goes, all you have to do is work hard and prove them wrong. Mm-hmm. And he never said, you listen to that, that's who you are. He said, work hard and prove them wrong. That's not who you are. And so I really take that to heart also. So I think that's where the patriotism came from, and loving our country and trying to preserve what we have, because there's no other place like it. Mm-hmm. So, but that was my military experience. And so when I took my oath for city council, also, I was the only one that took the oath on my Bible. Nobody else did. And there's a picture of my husband and I up at the little area where I took my oath, because he had to hold my Bible in order for me to take the oath. So that's why we were able as a couple to take that picture. But I just was surprised that there's no way to hold you accountable if you're not taking an oath for God.
Right. That is the power.
That is the
above
power.
Even the government.
Exactly.
Right. And the founders knew that.
So that's why it was important for me to do that at that point.
Yes. Well, we appreciate that. When you were a candidate for the Missouri State Senate, did your church was not yet doing a program of civic engagement?
Correct.
But that was the impetus for. So it's not like it's. I guess where I'm going with this is the pastor's involvement early on in American history was to motivate people in their congregation to run for office. So you would have biblically literate people running for office, getting elected, and submitting their will to the rule of law. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just had a public comment I gave to the Springfield Public School Board last night, saying that when you take an oath that says you will faithfully demean yourself for your office It means you will humble yourself to the rule of law. You're not there for your own power. You're not there for the agenda of your campaign supporters.
Or the title.
Or the title. This is not about you. You will demean yourself to the rule of law. And unfortunately, our public schools haven't been teaching, A, what the law is, and that the whole point here is to prepare you to govern yourself and to engage in government, to prepare people to assume those positions in government. And what has been happening, and I saw it happen from an organization that the school board ascribes to, they are subtly and slowly converting to technocracy rather than democracy. They're trying to shift the power to a superintendent rather than the deliberations of an elected board. That is undermining the Constitution.
Yes.
And I have been vocally pointing that out. But
Thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. But my whole point in telling that story was not to celebrate myself, but to say, I need more people out there. God needs more people out there
Correct.
doing the same thing, who know the law, who know the Constitution, who are willing to call out the boards during public comments saying, excuse me, you are neglecting your duties. And to take that all the way up to our state legislatures,
Yes.
like running for Senate, right? And to Congress. So there's a lot of work to be done. No one else will do it. It is incumbent on the people of God to take the responsibilities to be salt and light in the culture.
Correct.
Right? So can you tell us a little bit how campaigning affected your family?
Well,
Your husband clearly was as supportive.
yes. So the funniest thing, when I was on, it was October 1st, the first day that you could file for city council. I did not have any appointments at work, which had been a while since I've had 0 appointments. So I was like, okay, Lord, what are you doing? Like, thank you for today. What are you getting for me prepared for? So sitting there on Facebook, and
And you see him smiling, don't you?
I do. He's like, oh, you just wait.
Something for you to do.
I saw a post about how we need to challenge all the races on city council so that they have to earn our vote, not just get our vote when we don't have options. And when I read that, I felt a punch in the gut, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I started hyperventilating a little bit because I'm an introvert by nature. And most people don't believe that, but I really am. And so I was like, Lord, what are you doing? And he's like, you need to run for city council. So I called my husband into the kitchen, and I'm like, honey, I feel like God's calling me to run for city council. And without skipping a beat, he said, do it. And I said, no, wait, like, aren't you supposed to tell me like how crazy I am? This is ridiculous. I've never attended a city council meeting in my life. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. If God is telling you to run, you need to do it. So he was fully supportive. He's been supportive every step of the way. He's been my prayer warrior with me. He's, by my side. And so, he understands the time that it takes. He helped me door knock. He wasn't able to help me every day that I went out there, but he helped me as much as he could because he works also. And fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have children. We have puppies. So he just had to hold down the fort with, making sure the puppies are taken care of while I'm doing all the other things. And he actually is my helper at the civic ministry meetings. And so we're doing this together, but he understands where we're at. And again, he served our country and he took the same oath to protect the Constitution. So he feels strongly and passionately. Now, he does not feel led to run. He also thinks he wouldn't be a good candidate because he just speaks very frankly. He said it'll get him in trouble. But so he's just been an amazing supporter and a good place for me to have a good sounding board also when I have ideas or how to better prepare my messages and things like that. So
yeah. So in 2016, I ran for Congress for the 7th District. And that was after I tried everything, even a face-to-face meeting with the congressman to say, do not vote for the Every Student Succeeds Act. He did the next day. And I was just so filled with it was emotion, but God can use emotions to stir you into a different thinking pattern. And I said to my husband, I have to run. And he said, what will happen if you don't? I said, I'll burst. Okay, we're going to do it. Yeah, it was the same thing. Let's talk a little bit about Christians Engaged.
Yes.
That is an interesting ministry, not of Calvary Chapel, but I did see a Calvary Chapel pastor endorse this. And it does have a website, Christians
Yes.
Engaged website. And I liked what it had to say in taking a pledge to pray, to vote, and to engage. I think one of my great disappointments when I talk to Christians about how the children need you to secure their future of freedom, they'll say, well, I pray about it. And I'm like, that's good. That's good. Good start.
Yes.
You should always be led by God, but you're going to have to register to vote and make sure that you have investigated the candidates. You have to get out of your chairs.
Yes.
And do something here beyond saying, God's in control. He is sovereign, but he's given you stewardship over the earth.
Correct.
Yeah.
So at my civic engagement, that's one of the things I always challenge them. I close the meeting with, remember to pray for God to show you what he needs you to do that day and do that one thing. And sometimes it could be a political thing, but sometimes it could just be smiling at somebody that you normally typically wouldn't even look at, right?
Yeah.
So I said, just keep praying for God to show you what he needs you to do and do that one thing.
And if it makes you more comfortable, don't use the word political, use the word civic.
Yes. Well, that
Okay?
too.
Because, like I said, the people have a bad taste in their mouths from this dissension of putting one party against another. That's another Marxist dichotomy. Let's you and him fight. Let me tell you, they're equally as guilty of sending our country down the road of perdition. But if you frame it as civic engagement, saying, okay, we're going to take matters to rein in the evil, regardless of where it's coming from, and we're going to restore what was intended for our peace and our edification. I like that word, the building up rather than
right,
the tearing
tearing down.
So you have to vote.
Right. Well, even just like Moses, right? Could God have taken the Israelites out of Egypt just because he's God? He could have. Mm-hmm. But he asked someone to lead his people out of Egypt. That's an action. That's the engagement.
And he planted that someone as a baby within the system so that person was fully groomed to understand the ins and outs of the administration.
Correct. And I love John Quincy Adams' quote, duty is ours, results are God's. And that's another thing that I have to keep reminding, because that's another reason why I wanted to start a ministry for civics in the church, is because a lot of Christians would come up to me and I could see they were frustrated and angry. And when you're frustrated and angry, you become reactive instead of proactive. Mm-hmm. And so, you kind of, it's hard to keep yourself in your Jesus light, in a good frame of mind when you're frustrated and angry. So, you start calling names, you start taking it out on people, and you're not having that Christ-like love for your fellow man. So duty is ours, results are God's. I love that saying, just like with my race for Senate, right? The duty was for me to run. The results are God's. Mm-hmm. So win or lose, that was his to do with what he was going to do with it. So and I say it over and over so that I remember, because I get frustrated. I'm only human. I have fleshy feelings. And so I have to remind myself, as insurmountable as the fight looks like, God is in control.
Absolutely.
And all we can do is what we can do. So pray for God to show us what to do, and then do that one thing.
The battle belongs to the Lord. Yeah. In voting then, what the Cultural Impact Conference that we will discuss multiple times on this show and until it actually transpires in September. What we're hoping to do is to equip the churches to understand that having a voter registration table is not endorsing any particular party. It is equipping your people to engage in their civic responsibilities. And those civic responsibilities, what it says in Exodus is, first teach everyone the law, then select from those people the members of your community who demonstrated good moral character. So it is scriptural to vote, because you have to select from your educated people. Well, so my job is to restore the role of public education in the prep work, but that doesn't cancel the church's job to ensure that people are following through with that civic responsibility. So you
Correct.
have to engage. How do you have a voter registration in your church yet?
Yes, I'm a little bit behind this time around. I need to sign up again so I can do it again this before the August election. But we did one for the school board election. We were having most of the church were registered, so I only got a few people to register, and most of my church also does not live in Springfield, so it was really frustrating. But it is something that needs to be done for sure, and our church is open to that.
One of the products we hope to sell is a table with a banner that will promote the biblical principles of voting, so that churches can just walk away with the kit. You'll have to purchase it, but it'll be there for you to have available. If the conference is on a Saturday, you can set it up on Sunday.
Yep.
So that's our idea. So Angela, if people want to know more about what's going on at your church, in your ministry, and maybe contact you or how they can set that up at their churches, how can they get in touch with you?
My phone number, which is my business number, it's my all number, is 417-719-5049, or they can email me at angelaromine@proton.me, M-E, as you and me.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we enjoy having difference makers on this show, and I am thrilled to have you as our guest and to work with you further.
Yes. Thank you so much for the invitation. This has been so much fun.
My pleasure. And I hope you listeners appreciated Angela's contribution as much as I do. And we both bless you and wish you a wonderful day.
There's one in a land that we love. United we stand.